Stock sectors, sector ETFs for April 29th, 2025. This is Arvind Machandran. Now, what we have seen in the market is a shift in the short term, which does line up quite well with a short term trough that has formed in that early to mid April time period. And then we got into a rising mode. But what is really key here is as we look at these 17 sector ETFs, is there are two out of phase money flow patterns, one of which has a low that's due out in the August to September time period, one of which has a low that's due a little bit further out into the October time period. So what that says is we are very likely in a churning move here, overall still to the downside in the US stock market. With growth names like the XBI, XLH, what am I saying? XLK, sorry, SMH, IGV, XLC, TIN, right? Those names that are a little bit higher beta, those have just likely put in a low versus the more cyclical sectors like the XLY, XHB, XLB, XLI, IYT, XLE, XLF, right? Those sectors are not likely to form that low until that August to September time period. That looks like the highest probability here. So it says, a churn down. Right now we are seeing growth act a little bit better, but I'm not going to be looking for that to really last for all that long, and we'll be looking for this to actually curl its way down. Now, I am leading with what you are going to see because I do want to make sure that you are looking at all of these charts with a clear and concentrated takeaway from each of these charts, right? Not just look at our levels, right? Look at what the actual takeaway is from looking at 17 sectors of the US stock market. So hopefully that will be clear to you as we now look at these charts. Okay, so this is, let's actually move over here. This is the weekly and daily cycle analysis for the XBI. We'll pop over here. So as I said earlier, there's an intermediate term trough that just formed here, 3.3 to 5.5. Very sharp move down that, in all likelihood marked the low. And we then got a pop here back to the upside, 83.50 to 87 is likely as it does retrace a bit more of that spike down. So in the short term, be looking for a little move back up like that. Why? Let's go ahead and pop over to the short term. On the short term, you can see a turn down, a little higher low here. Yes, a whole lot of noise, but it was a higher low setup as we saw in all of the other sectors, and then a curl back up. RS has now turned up on the daily time frame. 78.684 quarter. That looks quite likely in the short term, and we'll be looking for a move right around there. That next trough is due somewhere around the third week in May. Pop over to the XLK. So this is the XLK. All right, so I've shortened this slightly to 26 from 27 because I see decent odds that this has formed that low off of what was obviously a fairly sharp sell-off. We put in the higher low right here. RS has now turned up, right? If we were still in a strong corrective mode, that RS really should not have turned up on the weekly. That's why I'm looking at this as a likely trough. 216.17 looks fairly likely, so a little bit higher. There's a 78.6 all the way up there at around 228. I would not look really for that to get hit. Rather, a move up, see where that high forms, but something like that looks quite likely. And note that next trough is due in the August to later part of September time period. Again, there's going to be a variance associated with the actual cycle lengths, meaning from key trough to from key trough to key trough is going to vary a little bit, right? So you have to just be aware of that, but somewhere around that time period. In the meantime, look for a little bit higher here in the XLK, and please think of that as growth, right? You can see some of these holdings. These are all growth stocks, right? Overall higher beta names. We'd be looking for those to still go a little bit higher prior to forming any kind of peak as of yet. Jump over to the short term. Why? Look at this higher low basing period. Now, obviously, this is a name that we have on our charts that we do update 2 to 3 times a week, right? This was the higher low setup right here, right at the 61.8. And again, obviously a ton of noise, but versus that 78.6 at 179, that would have been the setup. Certainly a lot of noise. Was not one that I actually took, even though this is what I would look for normally, but just really wide ranges, did not have great clarity. So I do want to be transparent about that, but this was a higher low setup that was there. There's a trough here that is due 5.6 right on 5.16. This is a basing cycle. So what does that mean, right? It says we look for a little pullback, put in the higher low, see another move back up. That's why I'm still looking for growth to act okay here in the short term. And this does look like a decent opportunity to actually still be looking to the long side on a dip down here in the XLK. So keep that on your radar. Jump over to the SMH. Very important here in the semis. There is a trough also due here, somewhere around that, in this case, late September into the very early part of October. To me, that looks like an area where we could be looking for risk and are likely to be. But right now, we have, in all likelihood, again, only odds, but in all likelihood, put in a trough here, and we're starting to curl up. The RS is very close to turning positive, so keep that on the radar. 220 to 230 or so looks quite reasonable. So I'd be looking for this to curl its way back up a bit higher here. Jump over to the short term, just as what we saw in the XLK. 5.2 to 5.14 is when that low is due. A higher low basing cycle. RS has now turned up. So a clear shift in bias is now warranted back to the long side here in the SMH. Put in that higher low. See another move back. I don't know why this pen is a little bit buggy here, but a move back to the upside like that here in the SMH. So keep that on the radar, also to the long side in the short term. Jump over to the IGV. You're seeing a theme here. Again, I did a lot of work here on this group because I'm seeing decent setups in names like NOW, PLTR, CRWD, CDNS, Oracle even, right? All these stocks look pretty decent, actually. RS has now curled up. So you're seeing a theme, right? So far, we have looked at the XLK, SMH, and now IGV, all of which have clearly put in a trough. 61.8 at 97.90, 78.6, 103.25. Looking for this to curl its way back up as well. Jump over to the short term. Also, the same thing, 5.6 to 5.20, right? So there's a trough that's due right around that same timing. Higher low basing cycle that's forming. So this is likely to form a higher low flag. And then just as what we've highlighted, look for this to curl its way again back to the upside. So I like this group a lot in the IGV. Now, note that next trough also due right around the end of September, into very early part of October. So that's the setup there for the iShares IGV. Jump over to the XLC. As usual, we have overlaid both META and GOOGL here. And we have the XLC in green, which has a trough that's due right around that 921 time period. This is also likely put in a low. RS is very close to turning back up. It needs to do so to really confirm it. 61.8 at around 97.40 looks, I would say quite likely. And an outside shot of the 78.6 at around 101. I do want to highlight that this is a weakening in the cycle structure. Look at how many looks at that 78.6 fib. So would not be surprised to see a lower high form and then to see this curl its way back down versus that 78.6. I would really not look for a move through the 78.6 right now. Obviously, it is possible, but the odds don't really favor that based on this weakening cycle structure. Jump over to the short term. 512 to 528 is when that low is due. And there is also a higher low basing cycle likely forming here. Please note, if you want to learn more about what we are saying in terms of basing cycles, Slim covers that in his cycle workshop. There are only a few days left on our biannual special that we do linked to the cycle workshop. So if you haven't previously purchased that, please look at all that we offer. Slim took countless hours to do that, and he did it to really isolate the core foundational aspects of the workshop. It is super key to first understand the base level prior to looking at these videos. Otherwise, you won't really understand it. It'll take a lot longer. So, as usual, just like with anything that we have to learn, always learn the core concepts first and then transition into more of an application oriented learning environment, right? So, that is why we would ask you to first look at that cycle workshop, and there are also deals if you are already a higher level member at askSlim. So please keep all of that in mind and head over to askSlim.com to learn more. There's a trough here that is due 512 right on 528. Watch for that basing cycle to form and then for it to curl its way back up. If we hop over now to the TIN, so this is the TIN. This is really quite interesting to me. Obviously, this is just in a horrible pattern, a series of lower highs and lower lows, but there is a trough that's due. 324 to 519. RS is still negative, but we'll be watching for that to try to curl its way back up. 3188 to 3554 is when that low is due. Are the actual levels here on the upside. Jump over to the short term. 5.5 right on 516. A bullish basing cycle also forming here. So all of these groups, right, they are looking the same. They have a trough that's due somewhere around that second week in May-ish, right? Put in that higher low and then are likely still poised for higher. So that was our list, right, of the names that have troughs that are due out in that October-ish time period. We have XBI, XLK, SMH, IGV, XLC, and TIN. So now we're going to then shift our eyes to more cyclical aspects of the U.S. economy. And for that, we will jump over to the XRT. So this is the XRT. You'll see that this one has a trough that's due out around the 11.9 time period. Different, right? Obviously, than what we have just highlighted. There's a trough here that is due in the XRT, 3.3 to right around 5.5. RS has just curled up after that sharp sell. We'll be looking for this to rally up to 70.38 to 73. Jump over to the short term in a only modest rising phase, but I am looking at this as a little basing period that is likely happening here in the XRT. It needs time to have an obvious setup, but I am looking at this as a basing period. Trough that's due 612 right on 626. So this is the other thing I want to highlight is that this daily timing right around mid-June is going to be consistent across many of these upcoming sector ETFs right around mid-June. They're clearly out of phase versus what we just highlighted in the XLH. I keep saying XLH, XLK, SMH, IGV, XLC. They're clearly out of phase. So these all have lows now that are due right around mid-June. So that's why I'm saying there is very likely going to be churn in the overall market as we're seeing a lot of push and pull with some groups rallying, some groups selling off. If we now jump over to the XLY, XLY is not in a great pattern, okay? There is a trough that was just due on this minor half cycle, but a low that's only due 630 to right around 9.1, right? So not now, right? We're really going to be looking for this to be a bear flag. RS has just curled its way back up. Failure somewhere around that 204 to 212-ish area, right? And then look for this to curl its way back down and look back at that low at around 168.90 going out into the later part of summer. That looks like a higher odds situation here. Short term here, you can see that there's a trough that's due 430 right on 513. So that's, overall in line with higher cap tech, right? But what I want to highlight is that next trough also due around 6.9. So my sense for this is we're going to see a little dip, another rally attempt, and then a shorting opportunity here for this to curl its way back down. So I'm going to be looking for this to form a peak. Please, keep in mind the overall concepts, right? When we see peaks, they usually are a process where you have to weaken the buying prior to seeing real selling. Now, on the downside, bottoms can happen suddenly, right? Where you see a sharp sell and then it, turns. Or you see a trend that is, really quite bearish on the downside, and that needs to weaken. So when you see like that, then obviously you have to see a clear base, such as what we had here. This was that higher low that then shifted the trend back to the upside. So you always have to think about how an underlying is trading either on the upside or on the downside in order to understand, what kind of formation is likely to form. Is it going to form a V spike on the upside and form a peak? That would only usually happen if you are seeing a really strong and accelerating trend to the upside. That's when you can form a V, right, on the upside or to the downside. And conversely, if you're in just a super strong trend, but that's not overbought by any stretch, but just that just keeps acting well, you need to see it really flatten out to then see a real shift in bias, right? And the opposite on the downside, right? A sharp down can lead to a V, as what we've seen in so many names recently, versus a strong trend down that is not oversold needs to take time to flatten prior to seeing that curl back up. So we'll have to see, but always think about that really in granular way, so that way you're not you aren't caught shorting too early, right? Or on the upside trying to buy too early. Understand how an underlying is traded and whether or not you will likely be needing to trade early versus trade late. That is something that I think that is really very important. 430 to 514 is when that low is due. As I said, I think this is going to need a little bit of time. Why? Because we just formed that low on the weekly. This needs to churn around a little bit prior to curling back down. That says likely a little bit of chop prior to seeing some a little bit stronger selling in the XLY. Jump over to the XHB. XHB has a trough that's due also. Look at that, right around that 9-1-ish time period. There's a trough here that's due 6.4 to right on 625. Very flat, no obvious setup right now. But we'll be looking for a rally into the zone 95.60 right around 102 to be approximately where this fails in. So that's the setup there in the XLB. Jump over to I'm sorry, that was the XHB. Let's go and hop over now to the XLB. This is what I had my mind on. Right, look at that low right around 825. So go back to the XHB for just 1 second, because this is all in the same timing. That's really what I want to highlight. That's all in the in the same timing. Cyclical aspects of the market, right around that August to September time period. So that's overall in line. Trough that's due 721 to 922 approximately. We're getting a rally 61.8 at around 84. This likely, again, it needs to take time. This is not going to form an obvious peak yet. It's going to take some time to really build out that high and then curl back down. That's why I have this only in a super light red, because it's really not in play yet. 78.6 at 87. If it moves over there, that would say that this is obviously some kind of late low. So just keep that in mind. 6.5 to 623 is when that low is due. So another one that has a low due, let's just say right around mid-June. But short term, we're in a rising mode. Look at this sharp down formed the low. So a sharp V spike low and the higher low, and we're in that rising phase still. So you're seeing that play out beautifully, right? So sharp down and then a move like that. Obviously, it was super news driven, so not in an ideal setup, but it's that same structure in the market playing out here. Jump over to the XLI. This is what I want to highlight here as well. 7.7 to 9.15, right? Another name that has a low that's due here. RS has just curled up. There could easily be like a minor half here. I just haven't really added to the charts, but you could see that this is in a rising phase on the daily time frame at least. 61.8 at around 131, 78.6 around 136. Let's just say only move over 136 would really change this core cycle pattern. Right now, I'm really not looking for that, but is this a short setup right now? To me, it's not, right? Because it has not given any reason to be looking short yet on the short term. And until that happens, I'm going to be having this as only a light red to show what the overall track would be, but it's really not in play just yet. Why? Because look, on the short term, sharp down, form the V, right? And then put in the higher low and is still in that rising mode. For this to be in play, you really need to see a turn down in the shorter term cycle pattern. Meaning for this to be in play on the downside on the intermediate term, this short-term cycle pattern really needs to be in a bearish setup, and it's really not there yet. We're still in that rising mode. We have now a neutral slim ribbon and a positive RS. That's not saying anything bearish here. So 130.66 to 135.47 is what we're looking at here. Again, a trough that's due 6.4 to right on 6.24, very much in line. Jump over to the IYTs. IYTs have a low that's due 6.30 to right around 9.1. This is acting much weaker. This is important, I think, because it's acting much weaker than the other sectors that we have highlighted so far. So of all of them, the IYT is the one that I am really interested in. We just saw earnings coming out of UPS, which they had a little overnight gap that then very quickly faded. So both UPS and FDX are actually on my list, really right around now, to be watching for a shorting opportunity. So just as a heads up, 6.30 to right on 8.25 or so is when that low is due. 61.50, 66.14 are the levels up. Short term, we're just holding. Okay, the RS is only mildly positive, not giving it a whole lot of weight. The overall trend is down, seeing a series of lower highs and lower lows. Slim ribbon is also just, I would say flat right here. It's 5.9 to 5.22, and then this low is right around, let's just say mid-June. So my sense here is what we're looking at is a little dip like that, another move up, and then a shorting opportunity out in the early part of June for a move back down. So this is something I have really in mind to be looking for a little bit of chop in the short term, then for a clear opportunity likely around 1 month away from now. 5.9 to 5.22 is when this low is due, and then that low, as I said, is due right around mid-June. So keep that in mind. Jump over to the XLE. So this is the XLE. There's a trough here, 4.7 to right around 7.14. It is possible that it formed an early low, but based on what we're seeing in all of the other sectors, I would like to see one more hit down, really, to clear out that low at 74.49 prior to forming the trough. So we'll have to see really what happens. 83.42 to 88.99 or so are levels up. Short term, 5.27 is when that low is due. So this is clearly out of phase versus the others. No clear setup yet. The RS is now positive on the short term. 82.25 to right around 87 are the levels up. So not really in play yet in the XLE, but that sell-off has me really watching for one more hit down. You can see that next trough is due right around mid-July. So that would be in line with the weekly. So do we see a move? Let me just go back to the short term for a second. Do we see a move like that, another rally, and then it starts to sell like that? That would be ideal. So you're seeing another opportunity probably coming in the early part of June, right, to the short side. Jump over to the XLF. Obviously, a sharp sell down to the 78.6 drawn from that low here on 4.15 to the high on 3.3. It bounced right off it. So this is really not in play yet to the downside. Very important to highlight that. That's why I have this in only a light red. It is not in play yet. It needs to first form that high. We are basically right at the 61.8, not putting a whole lot of weight on that yet, but that's at right on 48.66, 78.6 at 50.31. So in my eyes, we really need to lose that low here at around 45.14 for this to be interesting back to the short side, meaning let that high form and just see a move clearly underway to the downside. Absent of that, really don't have any interest in being short the XLF until we can clearly lose that low and then enter into that range here, right? So that's what I'll be waiting for, and that's at 45.14. Jump over to the daily time frame 610 to 626 is when that low is due, right? That's that low right there, 45.14. Until we lose that, right? What are we working with? We're working with a higher low, and that can continue. So rather than trying to, find the highs, which I don't ever like to do, just wait until there is a move that is underway and just really get on board. And in my book, I just want to see it lose that low. If that can happen, based on what happens here, and you start to sell down, I would be happily short through here and would be looking at a move towards likely around 42 quarter-ish. Absent of that, we're in a short-term rising mode, right? There isn't anything bearish happening here. 78.6 at around 50.40. And keep in mind that trough also due right around when the XLE has a low due, somewhere around, let's just say, middle part of July into the August time period. And the reason I'm saying August is because that next trough is due around mid-August. So we would look, for this to form a low somewhere around that mid-July to mid-August time period in the XLF, a bit out of phase, a little bit by a few weeks versus some of the other ones that we looked at. But the overall thesis is really the same. Growth has very likely formed a low. Growth is getting an oversold pop. Once that fades, we would be looking for likely around that early part of June time period, start to see some selling back on the downside into when these more cyclical sectors of the market have lows, and those are all due, let's just say, around that July to September-ish time period, somewhere around that time period, late summer, early part of fall, and see some further selling. So in the short term, right, bullish opportunities in names like the XLK, SMH, IGV, those look interesting to me. And I have my eyes out for peaks to form in some of the cyclical aspects of the market, including the IYTs, the XHBs, the XLIs, XLBs, right? Those are some of the groups that I have my eyes on for the short side, but they haven't done it. They haven't done what they need to say that they're really in play yet to the downside. So hopefully that has helped. I can tell you it certainly helped me to actually take time and walk through everything to understand, what has really happened after all of that sharp news, that sharp move down, all of that noise that we are literally getting on a daily basis. I don't know about you, but it has been a lot and something that is highly unusual. I have never seen that. So it's something that you're just having to really be super careful in. I've opted to do a whole lot less personally outside of just, I would say, smaller opportunities in names like crypto here and there, not a whole lot else, because I want to understand and be sure that whatever I am looking at, I am feeling confident in. If I'm not feeling that, then I don't want to be doing anything, and that is something that I think is super important because you can easily play Monday morning quarterback all the time and say, well, you could have done this and you could have done that. I don't really care about that because I didn't do that because I didn't have a clear understanding of what was going on, and that's fine. And I would much rather be flat than be trying to guess as to what's happening, because when you're doing that, you're far more liable to make an error, right? And those can be super costly. So I have no problem not doing a whole lot in stocks up until now. And I'll be waiting for, now that I have a clear understanding of what's happening, just waiting for an obvious opportunity to show itself based on all of the work that we have highlighted. Okay, so now with that, let's go ahead and jump over to the XLPs and we'll look at a couple more. So this is the XLPs. Choppy, right? Look at the range, right? Trading range or trend. This is a clear trading range. Look at the lower end, look at the upper end. Clearly defined, and where are we? We're right in the middle. So super neutral pattern. 7.7 to 9.15 is when that low is due. Short term, 6.13 to 6.26. Choppy, right? So we'll be looking for a low to form shortly here based on that minor cycle, and then for this to turn its way back up towards that 78.6, probably around the 82.50-ish area. $80 right on 78.30 are the levels down. Jump over to the XLV. XLV has a trough that's due right about now, 3.3 to 428, with that next trough due, let's just say, out in the September time period. So we'll be looking for this to get a rally towards the 61.8 at 142.52. 78.6 is also in play here at around 146. Sharp down. We should be watching closely for a faster retrace of some of that selling on the upside. Jump over to the short term. 5.8 to 522 is when that low is due. 61.8 around 141. 78.6 at 143.75. Seeing a higher low base forming. RS is now positive. Slim ribbon close to turning neutral. So this is getting interesting, right? You see a little move like that and then another move up. So interested actually to the long side as well in healthcare. Finally, we will look at the XLU. XLU has a trough that has just formed. As we have seen recently, there is so much reason and really so many reasons, I should say, to think that that in the US we are going to need so much more power than what we have, as it links to AI. China is so far ahead of us on this, like so far ahead of us. It is absolutely outrageous. And this is a group that is probably going to do quite well and continue to do so in addition to some of the uranium plays as well. So I do have my eyes on some of those names, such as URA. So I just wanted to share that with you as well. A clear base also forming in URA off of its weekly trough. I will highlight that probably in a trade idea in the coming days or so here. I do like what I see there, but at the core, there are massive shortages that need to get fixed. And what does that mean? It means metals and mining, and it means infrastructure plays that just need to happen, right? Outside of all of this noise that is happening as it links to tariffs, which I'm absolutely tired of reading about. But unfortunately, it is just the most dominant thing that is happening right now here. So we kind of have to talk about it. Think about these core themes, right, of energy, right? What are the overall drivers behind that? What are the names that are going to benefit from it? Because we are going to need a whole lot more power. And what are the underlyings that are going to benefit from that, right? So let's watch to see what happens here in the XLU. I think very high odds it moves over 80.53, and this old high would be in play at around 83.40. Short term, there's a low here that's due somewhere around the middle part of June, a trough that formed. Again, look at that sharp retrace back up to look at that really sharp sell-off, right? In only a few days, basically retrace the whole move. So this old high is in place around that 80.50 area in the short term. And as I said, 83.41 or so is the next level up. All right, so let's look there at the XLU. All right, so I do hope that was helpful to walk through. What are the core takeaways here? It says that growth sectors, or let's just say higher beta, have likely bottomed, at least for now. We'll be looking for a bit higher there. Now, as we get out into somewhere around the early part of June, I would like to see a little bit of selling start to get back into the market and start to see growth form a high and sell off a bit. And what I also want to highlight is what's going on in the more cyclical sectors of the market, like the XHB, XLY, XLB, XLI, IYT, right? All of those have troughs that are due somewhere in that August to September time period. So what that says to me is we're in just this overall time window, right, in the short term, let's just say, where we're probably going to be a little bit choppy. But as we get out into the early part of June, going to be looking for some selling to get back into the market here as we see some of that hard data as it links to input costs, right, filter into prices, and that should lead to some further selling, right? There's so much um, out there that is leading one to think that we would probably see, at least in the short term, some increase in prices. Obviously, on a longer time frame, if we do see a larger slowdown, then tariffs would be deflationary. But in the short term, you would see just like what we're seeing on um, you know um, on marketplaces like uh, Timu and Amazon, right? You're seeing prices which are going to show the impact of tariffs, right? Importers have to actually pass on those costs to consumers. There's really no way around it. So even if tariffs come down, input prices are going to be going up, and those will get passed through. So you will be seeing in the short term higher prices, and that should show up shortly here in the coming few weeks, and that will, in my view, lead to some further pressure on many more cyclical sectors of the market. So hopefully this was helpful. A little bit of a longer video, but obviously a whole lot to cover. If you have questions, feel free to reach out. Thanks again, and have a good day.